Hi everyone, welcome to the first of our series of videos we're going to be doing to introduce us to advocacy to end commercial sexual exploitation. Just some warnings before we get started. We're going to be talking about some sensitive topics. You may not want your kids in the room while you're watching these videos. And if anything we're talking about should be triggering or jarring for you, please take a moment to step away, center yourself, and don't feel pressure to push yourself if anything is offensive or particularly triggering to you. Thanks. Let's get started.
So let's jump into today's first mini lesson. We are going to just begin by talking about some of the terms related to ending commercial sexual exploitation. So as you can see from the graphic here, people use a lot of different words, and the words are oftentimes charged. And so we want to be able to differentiate between the terms. So each of these first very quick videos is going to introduce you to a new term and kind of talk about how it's used and who typically uses it, maybe who doesn't use it. So as you can see here, we have things like sex trafficking, sex work, sex positive, consensual, subordination, neo-abolitionist. So all of these terms speak to one's relationship to the commercial exchange of sex, and whether you view that positively or negatively as something oppressive or as a means to empower or a means to at least sustain oneself and survive. So let's get into something a little bit light to help us introduce ourselves to the topic.
So we just finished listening to a few bars of Lady Marmalade by LaBelle. And if any of you are like me, you maybe sang this song as a kid, not necessarily knowing that you were singing Would You Like to Sleep With Me Tonight, or that you were singing a song about the commercial exchange of sex. Because Lady Marmalade is a woman who works as a prostitute, and of course men, and the man in the song, Joe, is paying her for sex. And so I bring this song up because there are different ways that we look at what is happening when sex is used as a commodity. So these words and these terms matter. They definitely have different meanings. So in terms of commercial exchange of sex, that is the most neutral term that I can use. I don't normally use it, but for the record, it's the most neutral way to talk about any time a person performs a sex act and receives either cash, goods, or services in return, right? That being said, you have the more positive term that came about in the late 1970s by Carol Lee, who wanted to push back against the term sex use industry because it was objectifying, and instead referred to what she was doing as sex work, because she wanted to place emphasis on the labor being performed in the commercial exchange of sex, rather than objectifying and oftentimes judging the person performing the sex act. So sex work, the use of that term argues that there is a labor being performed in these sex acts, and in particular, it assumes a certain level of choice, agency, and voluntariness. Okay, so that's our first word for our mini video for today. When we come back for our next video, we are going to get into commercial sexual exploitation. So just to review and put it in simple words, commercial exchange of sex happens all the time in many different forms. Sex work implies that there is some sort of choice and control for the person performing the sex act or the sex work. And commercial sexual exploitation, which we'll get to in our next video, spoiler alert, assumes that there is some kind of force, either direct or indirect, and that the person performing the sex act has a lack of choice and control. And that is where our advocacy work will pick up in our next video. See you then.